record it right now. You're recording this? Sure. Okay. So hopefully it will work this time around. If not, then you will have at least the audio, which might be less of a problem right now because you don't have to look at the table and the numbers and so on. We will be just talking about a particular set of problems. Today it pertains to chapter 24 in your book, which is, I don't know how it's titled, but what it deals with is simply how interdependence among economic agents. So relationship between mutual dependence and opportunistic behavior. I'll explain in a second what these mean and why is this a significant problem to worry about. This definitely doesn't work, so what else? So mutual dependence is a type of situation emerging in a market setting. Whenever economic agents, there are a couple of reasons why it may emerge, but one type of the reasons is when the economic agents cooperate or coordinate their activities by other means than market prices. So we've seen one classical example of that last time with a firm, with a private firm. So the firm is a type of an organization in which you have a team of people producing something jointly, where they don't communicate or coordinate what they do and how much they do through market prices, but rather through orders and explicit, let's say, explicit authority that some people have over other people. Have a hierarchical types of relationship. And we've seen that there are some problems emerging from this framework of the firm in which you have a team that produces something jointly. So everybody needs to cooperate, and yet the product, once you create the product, individual contributions could not be so easily disentangled. You can have disentangled individual values of market products that you buy. You know how much to your consumer welfare a computer contributes and how much coffee contributes and how much other things contribute because you have their market prices and you have the quantities that you buy. So you can compare these values and disentangle the contributions of these things to your individual welfare by simply looking at the objective price data. Cup of coffee is worth 1/100th of the laptop. It's not so easy to disentangle when you have a productive team how much any single individual contributes to whatever $1,000 of value produced. We have 5 people working. Is it $200 each one of them? Very unlikely. How much each one of them? So see, this problem, inability to disentangle individual contributions of the team members to the final product, then creates incentives for free riding and moral hazard that we argued before. So it's not easy to detect shirking because it's not easy to understand how productive any given person is. So then theoretically you might have a team of people in which 8 of them work with 100% efficiency and dedication and 2 of them are lazy bums. And certainly in many market settings, it's not simple and straightforward to discover and punish shirkers and to prevent or minimize the free riding. So this is then mutual dependence, is this teamwork. We depend on each other for a successful performance of the task. And yet this mutual dependence creates opportunistic behavior, incentives for opportunistic behavior. I'm going to free ride on your efforts while doing little to no work myself. So then we've seen when it comes to the firm that there are different mechanisms how firms can overcome or minimize this problem, and what kind of qualities the leadership team needs to have in order to be successful in limiting the costs of team production and so on. But that's just one type of situation in which you have opportunistic behavior as a real problem. We find it in all walks of life. We find it in everyday life, for example. We depend on other people in order to successfully perform our tasks or to successfully achieve our goals. We depend on other people behaving in a certain way, which is not opportunistic, but rather, let's call it expected or in accordance with our interests. You drove to the campus from Bismarck downtown. You rely on a certain type of behavior of other drivers, that they will not take advantage of the opportunity to drive in a left lane. So the predictability of behavior and behavior that is consistent with the interests of other people is something that we very often take for granted, but that we shouldn't be taking for granted always. And not all situations that we face in life are equally fraught with opportunistic behavior. Business partners, two different firms. So not only that within the firm there is a chance of opportunistic behavior. There are plenty of opportunities to behave in this fashion between the firms. Firms can have different interests. Firms can have conflicting interests. Your vendor may not behave in a way which is consistent with your own interest. They may blackmail. Supplier may not fulfill their contract obligations. If it costs you more to break the business relationship than to suffer the negative consequences of opportunistic behavior, then they can engage in opportunistic behavior, which means that they can reduce the supplies or increase the price or impose the suboptimal standards of quality. If they gauge that it would be for you even more costly to break up the business relationship and find somebody else. So there are plenty of opportunities for opportunistic behavior whenever we face two or more economic agents. So not only within firms, not only when the market prices are absent, but also in the relationship between different business firms. Why is this important? Why we talk about this in the course of price theory in the class that deals with microeconomics, price theory, exchange, production, and so on? A simple reason is to show that there is no contradiction between stuff that we learn pertaining to market prices and exchange and this type of situations here. And these types of situations do not call into question the hypothesis of the efficiency of market exchange in and of themselves. And the way how we will see this is that there is a deep disconnect between how ordinary people who are not well versed into the details of economic theory evaluate certain market practices that are primarily dictated by the need of minimizing opportunistic behavior. Certain market practices, some of which we will mention now, they're usually highly critically, that people have usually a very critical attitude towards these ideas, towards these mechanisms of dealing with opportunistic behavior, that they usually tend to be anti-competitive, or monopolistic, or exploitative. Certain business practices like retail price maintenance, we will talk about, or exclusive service contracts, and so on, or the informal price ceilings, and so on. Certain measures that the firms and individuals adopt that look to an untrained eye as a conspiracy or collusion of businesses against consumer. There are certain practices that we will analyze today that look on the surface of it as a form of business collusion against the consumer, whereas in reality they are just the forms of minimizing the problems of opportunistic behavior. They work in the interest of consumer rather than being a form of exploitation. So which are the forms? So now I want to talk about a little bit about 4 or 5 different, let's say, market mechanisms or phenomena that we observe in economic reality, that all of them economically try to minimize opportunistic behavior and that people are critical of because of misconceptions about what is the economic nature of these measures. So the first one of them is something we already encountered, the concept of integration of ownership. So integration of ownership is a process whereby one firm acquires or buys multiple other firms and they are now one and single organization. It could be horizontal or vertical integration. What is the difference? Vertical versus horizontal integration?
Is horizontal like, say, Ford bought Chevy, so it's like the same thing, but
the same level, the same stage of production.
Verticals, like if you buy like the place that makes the metal, and then the place that makes the tires, that kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. That's vertical integration is when you integrate together different stages of the production of one and the same good. One example that we use is Rockefeller's integration of the oil business. Oil extraction, refinery, distribution, retail. Usually, or maybe it could be a default position that you have different firms operating at each one of these stages. But if you decide sometimes to integrate all of them into one firm, that's a vertical integration. The usual way, what do you think if we accept the price taker model or perfect competition model as a standard for competitiveness of any given market? What would be the first, like a knee-jerk reaction of a classically trained economist or a journalist or anyone else to vertical or horizontal integrations? So what is the key assumption, one of the key assumptions of price taker model?
You have a lot of firms.
Large number. So what is the instant reaction? That many pundits and journalists and intellectuals have, whenever we talk about the acquisitions or mergers or market transactions that concentrate the market, that reduce the number of competitors, that's bad for competition. More competitors equals stronger competition. However, there are multiple reasons for both horizontal and vertical integrations. And one of the very important reasons, the guy, recommending to read this guy. Oliver Williamson, he got the Nobel Prize in economics for this analysis. He spent his entire life studying this thing here, how chances for opportunistic behavior between the firms at different stages of the same production lead to the incentives for vertical integration. So you're my supplier, actually, and now if you're not a reliable supplier, if you want to exploit my relative dependence on you, your supplier, then I have two choices: to endure any kind of shenanigans that you're doing, any kind of harm that you may do out of your selfish interest, and your control of my production. For example, if I depend on a single firm for 90% of the supply of a key ingredient in my production, then you have a pretty big power over me, pretty big influence on my business operations. So that means that you can dictate to a considerable degree the terms of exchange. which may then kind of disfavor, or what is the term? Brain doesn't work. What is the English? This makes me in a relatively worse position vis-a-vis competition, vis-a-vis my competitors who are not exposed to the same type of opportunistic threats on your front. So then, if this is the case, if you're a supplier who is behaving badly towards me, and I don't have much choice because I don't have equally good sources of supply elsewhere, I may decide actually to buy, to reduce the costs of negotiation. Even if there is no too much opportunistic behavior, I may just cut the middleman. Philosophy of cutting the middleman. I may decide to acquire your firm. It's an example that is given in your book, actually, especially. So vertical integration is one. For example, manufacturing and retail. If manufacturing and retail businesses have different interests, they have a conflict of interest, and that's sometimes the case. We'll see some examples of that in a moment. Then one of them may decide to acquire the other one, usually manufacturer acquiring retail. So integration of ownership is one of those seemingly anti-competitive measures that have perfect economic sense in certain conditions characterized by opportunistic behavior. Integration of ownership is a form of reducing the opportunistic behavior. What do you think? What are the limits of vertical integration? What will determine eventually whether you're going to decide to buy your supplier or you're going to say, no, it's not worth it? So the main benefit is actually overcoming this cost that you are incurring because the guy is behaving in an unprofessional fashion towards you, or blackmailing you or charging you higher prices. So that's the benefit. What is the cost? Cost of vertical integration. Of course, it's always marginal cost versus marginal benefits. So now, whether at one level your decision will be dictated whether marginal benefits are greater than marginal costs. So we know what are marginal benefits if you buy this one firm, but the financial costs that you incur right now will disappear or be reduced. What are costs? What are the costs of this? It's the most obvious thing first. You're buying a firm. You need money. If you need to pay more for the acquisition of the firm, then the damages that you suffer by not buying a firm, then you're not going to buy, of course. But that's not the end of the story. What other costs you have when you increase the size of your firm?
Get more expenses.
On what?
Well, like you have a whole other firm, you also have to you now have to pay for all of those expenses of that firm.
You mean variable expenses like labor and other stuff? Okay, but your revenue will go up as well. Yep. 20 workers, you're paying 20 wages. 30 workers, you're paying 30 wages, but 30 workers produce more, so your revenue will go up as well. But what is the main problem? What is the main benefit of a larger size? We discussed that last time.
Production limit.
Yeah, production. Yeah.
Like,
what do you mean by production level?
Like
production limit.
When like the limit, like when you start producing more than what you're gaining.
Yeah. That's the final result. But what dictates the production? What dictates the size, the upper limit of the firm's size? You're going to stop increasing the size of the firm when when your additional marginal cost starts exceeding your additional revenue, marginal revenue. So that's clear. What dictates this balance? Where this balance will be? The two types of the cost.
Is it like the demand that people like? Because if there's nobody that is buying or nobody that wants it, then it's not going to go any higher than that, right? Or
how do you mean the demand for final product?
Yeah, like if nobody wants it, I guess, or if you've reached the limit of people that are going to want the final product, then you're not going to sell any more than that.
But you can sell, you can reduce your price. So you can reduce your price but why then you cannot indefinitely increase the scope of your operation by hiring new people and reducing prices? So what are the benefits of increasing the size of the firm? Division of labor, specialization. You can be more productive when you have more people working together. Let's go economy of scale. Walmart is cheaper. Walmart is cheaper than mom and pop shop because it can produce stuff or sell stuff at lower per unit cost. Large concerns like large corporations are more productive than small firms because they have the advantages of economy of scale. That is derived from specialization. Larger the size and scope of the operation of the business firm, more opportunities for division of labor there are. Remember Adam Smith's needle factory. 10 people who specialize can produce much more than 10 people who do not specialize. Okay, but what is the cost of increasing? So that's the benefit of increasing the size. What is the cost of increasing the size?
Management costs.
Yeah, management cost, organizational cost. So then this balance between marginal production cost reduction stemming from specialization of labor and increasing marginal cost of management will eventually limit the size of the firm. The firm will be as big, or the size of the firm will be determined by the equilibrium between marginal cost, managing costs, how much it will cost you if you want to increase the number of workers by one, how much that will increase your cost of organizing and managing and monitoring everyone's performance and so on. So it's easier to monitor five people team than 500. So that's the cost. And marginal benefit, it's actually how much more you can produce if you manage well the firm, how much more you can produce on the account of specialization and division of labor. So that will determine then whether you're going to go into vertical integration or not. That will determine. But the main goal, the main reason why you are doing it is not to exploit consumers, is not to grow your firm in size, is not anything like that. It's just to reduce the cost of opportunistic behavior of your partners on your business operation. Okay, sometimes people may decide against vertical integrations, but still there is an opportunistic, there are chances of opportunistic behavior. There is another mechanism that is also very much maligned and misunderstood by general public, and economic analysis shows that this mechanism is perfectly normal and economically beneficial. It's called reciprocal dependence. The situation is called the reciprocal dependence, and the mechanism that is used to deal with reciprocal dependence or interdependence, however, dependency, they use it, doesn't matter, is hostage exchange of hostages. The example in your book is very good and illustrative. Imagine you have a shell company in Texas that produces oil and gasoline and sells it through its own distributional network in Texas and Southwest and the South. but they don't have their own distribution network in the north and northeast. And then ExxonMobil is also a firm operating in the same line of production as Shell, and they have a very good distribution network in the north, but they don't have it in the south. So now what you want to do as a Shell company, what is your goal? You want to increase your revenue and your sales by selling your gasoline in the north as well, not only in the south. But you don't have a distribution network. So then you can sell it through Exxon's distribution network. That can create problems because Exxon may decide at a certain point strategically to financially ruin you by cutting off your supply. So imagine what can happen if you increase your sales 30%, you're going to increase the number of shares, you're going to invest into oil drilling and all other operations, counting that your new revenue will be forthcoming all the time. And then, bingo, at one point, ExxonMobil may decide just to cut off their distribution network and your revenue goes down 20% and you're ruined in an instant. So that's a big risk. Even if they don't expect them to do it right now, they're your competitors. They might do it tomorrow or in 2 years, in 3 years. So now what you do? You say to them, okay, you don't have your distribution network in the south. So let us sell your gasoline that you produce in the north, in Texas, in Arizona. Let you sell your gasoline to our gas station networks in the south in exchange for your service to us by allowing us to sell it to your own network. So what this arrangement does is actually creates a mutual interdependence, like what is called during the Cold War, mutually assured self-destruction. If you launch a ballistic missile against me, I'm going to launch it against you, and you know that I have as good missiles as you have, so you know that nobody can win this war. We all be destroyed. So the conclusion is that nobody will launch a missile. So here, actually, I'm your hostage. You can destroy me whenever you want, but I'm pretty much certain that you're not going to destroy me because you're my hostage as well. You're selling 30% of your oil and gasoline in America through my network, just as I'm selling it through your network. So that's this mechanism. What does this look to a general observer? Two big corporate fat cats, Shell and ExxonMobil. What they do when you look superficially, they're conspiring against. They're cooperating. Instead of competing, they're using each other's infrastructure to, God knows, to do what. Usually, they're up to no good, to exploit consumers in some way. So people instinctively, viscerally detest the idea of big corporations cooperating together for some purposes. I think that there might not be legitimate reasons for that, and the reason is very simple and beneficial for the final consumer. That's important because ExxonMobil selling in the south through the distributional network of Shell increases supply of gasoline and oil, reduces prices for local consumers, and increases the reliability of supply. And the same applies to Shell's oil that is sold in the north. So see, another example of this disconnect between how things look to an economically untrained eye, or the general public, or am I repeating myself? And how things look to, when you just look, not very deeply, but the basic economics of what's going on. So hostage taking is a competitive mechanism of limiting the chances of opportunistic behavior that would be harmful for one of the competitors. Why in the case of Shell and what do you think? Why in the case of Shell and ExxonMobil, hostage exchange is more likely than horizontal integration?
Take a lot of capital to buy one.
A huge amount of money, huge companies. So it's cheaper. It's way cheaper. Okay, another example. Now we're, let me see. Oh, similar examples. The vertical dependency. So now you have the problem of vertical conflict of interest between two firms in the same structure of production, but you don't have vertical integration. Are there any other? So vertical dependency. Are there any other ways of dealing with the conflict of interest short of vertical integration when you have two firms or multiple firms at different stages of production that have conflict of interest? Take one example. Again, from your book, a very nice example. Publisher and distributor of a newspaper. Very often, the interest of the publisher is to sell as many copies as possible. Why is that the case? Because by far the largest percentage of publishers' income would come from advertising income. So larger the number of copies that you sell, the higher the likelihood that people will pay more money to advertise in your newspaper. So everybody wants to advertise in Wall Street Journal, New York Times, and Fox News, and CNN. Nobody wants to pay big money to Joe Schmo's radio station somewhere in Montana, or far less money. So that's the reason. That's publisher's interest. Publisher earns much more money from advertising revenue than from selling the physical copies of the newspaper. Distributor has a different interest. He earns money by selling copies. So his interest is to, by the way, then in order to sell as many copies as possible, you want as low a price as possible. So distributor would push for a low price of a physical copy of the journal in order to increase the sales. You know, the first law of demand: lower the price, higher the quantity demand. That's the basic idea. Now, distributor is not so sure because his only source of income is, he doesn't care about the marketing revenue. His only source of income is how many copies you sell. So you don't want to go too low to the prices. You want to push for higher prices. So there is a conflict of interest. Two independent firms having different. So now the manufacturer or publisher is at the mercy of distributor who can behave in an opportunistic fashion and take advantage of him and work against his interest by selling it too low a price newspaper, harming advertising revenue, which is the main source of income for the publisher. So now what to do? Vertical integration is one thing that very often happens. The publisher would have their own network of their own distributional network, but other things could be done as well. For example, informal price ceilings. So I'm giving you my newspaper. I'm allowing you to profit from selling my newspapers, but I say you cannot charge more than this price per unit. Sometimes, I don't know how many of you buy paper copies, physical copies of newspaper. Of course. It's a superfluous question. So I remember when I was young in Serbia, I would be buying all kinds of daily and week newspapers and weeklies, and all of them would have a price. 100 dinars, 200 dinars, and so on. There's a very simple reason for this. You want to minimize the ability of the distributed network to charge lower prices. So that's the idea. I'm not gonna distribute you my newspapers anymore if you charge a lower price. If you charge a higher price than some not artificially, but some set price maximum. If you charge a higher price ceiling. So you cannot increase the price too much because that works against my interest. So that looks also bad to an outside observers. You also have a kind of collusion, a kind of cooperation between the two private firms. And the reason is once again very simple, straightforward. Or another, the opposite example, type of conflict that exists between producer, manufacturer, and retailer sometimes. That leads to the opposite conclusion when producers' interest is that as many goods as possible are sold, but in the same time he insists on higher prices than the distributors, than the retailers. So I have some examples like manufacturer of something that requires a cooperation of retailer. In order for me, what's a hearing device? I'm a manufacturer of hearing devices. I don't have my own distributional network. I don't have my own retail stores. I depend on the existing retailers to market, advertise, and sell my hearing aid. So hearing aid is a type of product that requires additional work from the staff to demonstrate the benefits to every single customer, to demonstrate how it works, to make sure that an appropriate hearing device was bought. So these things cost money. So retailers incur additional costs just in order to sell a unit of a product that they get from the manufacturer. Now, imagine if the manufacturer doesn't dictate any conditions. What's going to happen? Very quickly. So if you're a firm that provides this additional service, you're going to have to charge a higher price because you have additional costs of marketing and advertising and educating the customers about the benefits of the good and losing time in doing so. So your prices will have to be slightly higher than the prices of a firm which would not offer such services. Okay? So now what's going to happen? Very likely, moral hazard, free riding problem, opportunistic behavior on the part of cheaper retailers. So you can go in a store and shop around and ask, and they're going to help you and they're going to explain you everything. And once you realize what is the product that you want to buy, you just go into another store that doesn't provide those services and buy whatever you want for a cheaper price. So what's going to happen to me as a manufacturer of hearing devices if this thing starts going on a large scale? I'm going to be losing revenue very quickly. Why? Because those firms are not idiots as well. Those who provide additional services. They will realize very quickly that they're losing revenue themselves by providing those additional services. They will stop providing those additional services. Less additional services in the retail means that lower number of units of my product will be sold. So then what I do in order to prevent this? I impose the price floor. This is called retail price maintenance. If you want to sell my hearing device, you're not to sell it below, and then I calculate what will be the probable wholesale price plus profit plus additional costs of retailing. If you sell it at a cheaper price, I'm not going to supply it. What is the goal of this? Is it to exploit consumers, to impose higher prices? No, it's just to prevent free riding on the part of unscrupulous firms that do not offer additional services. So retail price maintenance. An informal price floors, which means the minimum prices that you can charge. You can charge more, but you cannot charge below this, in order to prevent some firms from free riding on the efforts of other firms. So then, if you're an unscrupulous firm that wanted to take advantage of others, you are now facing a situation to simply you cannot charge a lower price, then you're going to be losing revenue. If you do not provide those additional services, you're not going to have enough customers, so you have to do it. You have now to offer those additional services in order simply to sell the product. Because you cannot compete now by offering less services for a lower price. And now just offer less services for the same price. There is no incentives for people to switch from others who provide services. So you're going to be losing money. So retail price maintenance is just a mechanism for eventually providing a better service and higher quality products to customers. So what the general public would say, you see those corporate fat cats are conspiring in order to rip off the grandpa who needs a hearing device. Essentially what is going on that they are providing the conditions for the grandpa to have a better hearing device at a lower price. It shouldn't shock you that retail price maintenance was illegal for many decades. Until 1970s, essentially. They realized actually that there is an economic reason behind this. That this is not a conspiracy of firms to impose artificially high prices. It's an actually economically meaningful transaction. This is another example of this disconnect between the economic meaning of what firms do and the preconceptions that the general public has about the meaning of what they do. The last thing here. By the way, any questions about this? You understand this mechanism, how this works? Yeah. Good. Any questions? Please don't hesitate. We have time. 5 minutes. Okay, exclusive contracts. Those evil Hollywood producers who sign contracts with young actors for 10 years or whatever, they cannot work for anyone else. Exploitation, unequal power, wealthy and powerful people taking advantage of young rising stars. That's what the general public thinks. So what is exclusive contract? You sign a contract with me, you cannot work with anybody else for the next 5 years, 6 years, 10 years. That's exclusive service contract. That's what general public thinks very often. What is economic reality of this is that in some types of business operations in which it costs you a great deal of money to discover the talent and to train somebody to become a highly performing worker who can earn a huge amount of money. It's very costly. So some statistics show that out of 10 potential targets for Hollywood A productions, 9 of them will fail. Only 1 of them will become whatever, Brad Pitt or Elizabeth Moss or whoever. So now imagine if you, and what is exclusive service contract? It's a compensation for this. It's highly uncertain. You start fishing around for acting talent. It's very likely that you're going to fail. It takes a lot of time and energy to make a real star out of somebody who's just a mere talent. So then if you expect me to invest my time, money, and energy into discovering a new talent, then I need a compensation for that in advance, which is exclusive service contract. So I don't want to make somebody a star, and then he or she signs over with somebody else, and I created the product, and then somebody else is taking advantage. You have in sports the same thing. I know I follow European football more, but probably the same thing is American basketball and elsewhere. You sign a player, so sometime somewhere in Eastern Europe, you sign for Real Madrid or Manchester United. This guy was a nobody. You discovered him, and your scout said, "This guy is a new Cristiano Ronaldo or whoever." And lo and behold, he plays 1 or 2 years in Real Madrid, and he really becomes a big star. Everybody realizes that your guess was correct. He's a real star. And he signs over to Manchester United in 1 year. it ain't gonna work. So you make a contract in which says you're gonna play 4 years for Real Madrid or now, and if you break the contract, whatever team signs you over is gonna pay us a really, really big money compensation. This is also the same. This is also the same mechanism here. Exclusive service contract, which compensates the investor for the costs of training and actually creating a marketable product out of somebody who was just a mere talent. So it's also not just to complain against powerful people exploiting the weak ones as well. Any final questions? Okay, have a nice weekend, everybody. See you next week.